part 2 of the anatomy discussion around the arms and the hands. In part 1, we talked about structural anatomy. In part 2, we're going to talk more about action anatomy. That includes both how our muscles help support our joints and also how we transfer energy, prana, from the earth through our body into our core. The principles of physiology that we're going to talk about in today's lesson are counteraction and compensation. Counteraction can be looked at a couple different ways. On the surface, it's really defined as the muscles on opposite sides of the joint. In the case of the elbow, we call it the biceps or the flexors, and the triceps or the extensors. When they work against each other, when they contract at the same time, at the same amount, it stabilizes the joint they cross. So in this case, the elbow. I can push with my triceps or I can pull with my biceps. That moves the joint, right? The second type of perspective we have on counteraction is that it follows like the third rule of physics, Newton's version, right? That says for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So this says that if I actually add some resistance to the system, right? My biceps and triceps working against each other, or my two palms pressing against one another, I actually can put less energy into the system because just by resisting, I increase my output, okay? So this concept really dinged for me, the light bulb came on when I was working in postures like plank, where all of a sudden I realized if I push into the earth is actually pushing back at me with the same amount of effort. So psychologically, I could turn that around and say, oh, I don't have to do half the work. I don't have to try so hard. I can just push into the earth and the earth is going to actually lift me up. So counteraction is this powerful concept, especially when we're weight bearing in the hands, because let's face it, yogis do that more than most people, and the fact is we're not really designed to do it. So we have to use all of the benefits of physics that we possibly can to ease that impact. All right, so that second principle of physiology, compensation. What we really want to avoid in the upper extremity is our bones and our ligaments absorbing all the energy that our muscles could be using. This will happen in things like the locking out of the elbow and the collapsing of the wrist joints, right? When we activate physically through our musculature, we actually also activate the flow of prana from that connection with the earth, or even here in space. You can see my hands acting in Hasta Bandha, the container of energy of the hand. Whether I'm here in space or connecting with the earth, that creates a continuity up my extremity and into that space of the chest and upper back, where now I have like, ooh, big, powerful muscles to do a lot of the heavy lifting. All right, so in our first part, we talked about the importance of having our hands be as wide as they need to be to match our particular carrying angle, right? And we place some pieces of tape on our mat to help our brain keep track of where that is and not just move back to our habituated narrowness. So my pieces of tape are still here. You want to make sure that you can see them outside the thumbs, or in this case, inside the thumbs. All right. When it comes to making the connection of Hasta Bandha, the bandhas being those containers of energy, we're most familiar with the ones in the core usually, the Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, Jalandhara Bandha, and the extremity bandhas, our hands and our feet, these are really what help those core containers interact with the world around us. They have a feedback loop of sensory and action, just like our nervous system. So we have to become more aware of the action of our palms. You can see that when my hand is just soft, my fingers kind of curl in, even when my palms face up, and everything just goes slack, right? But then I can stretch out my fingers. I can overdo that till the point where my palm is blown out and I don't have any actual grip left. So we want to find that middle ground. How do the muscles of the back of my arm and the front of my arm, how do they balance each other out? I might pull my fingertips back, but then push through the knuckles of the hands. I'm gonna let the thumb be soft because as we talked about in part 1, it's actually a separate entity from this system, right? And so I really want to focus on that pinky to index finger that then when I really activate it, you can see that the center of my palm actually starts to hollow out without blowing out the entire system. When I'm in space, this feels like I'm gripping a very large beach ball, right? Not just with the tips of my fingers, but imagine that your whole palm could actually wrap around the contour of that large beach ball. When I hit the earth for weight bearing, however, what I really want to do is get light through my carpal tunnel while pressing actively through the index and middle fingers. Again, the thumb softens and doesn't take any weight. So once I go down on the earth, it looks like the difference between this, locked out elbows and collapsed wrist and light fingers and knuckles, and instead I allow that subtle turnout to happen. My hand bones now align both physically and energetically with that finger, hand, forearm, all the way into my shoulder, right? And when I do that, I can push actively through index and middle finger and make the carpal tunnel pretty light. If I make sure to keep my arms behind the crease in my wrist, I can also then, there's my counteraction. Pushing down with the knuckles to lift not only through the center of my palm, but also through the center of my heart, right? Because these bandhas connect into our core body, both energetically and physiologically, right? My pecs are gonna fire, but they're not gonna take over completely so that my upper back collapses. Neither are my back shoulders going to take over totally and my chest give way completely. I find this middle ground of pushing and pulling, pushing the earth away and pulling my heart forward that finds this middle ground of buoyancy, never allowing my wrist to collapse or my elbows to lock out. That locking, that compensation into my ligaments simply diverts energy away from my core body and pukes it out the front of my elbows. So that's that forward and back energy of counteraction, okay? We also have rotational counteractions that we can make. When we have, let me grab Fred's arm here and help out a little. When we have that, this is her arm, that's why, okay. When we have the bicep or the humerus neutral, right, we don't have to move that whole structure. We can move just from the elbow and internally rotate the elbow and wrist so the palm faces down. What we want to avoid in that is the elbow pointing out. So we externally rotate the arm bone while internally rotating the forearm bones. In cueing our postures, this is the same as drawing the elbow in and also pressing down through those index and middle fingers. That gives you the external rotation at the arm and shoulder and the internal rotation at the elbow and forearm. Once you get that, you no longer have that bulldog sense, right? And if we've turned our hands out appropriately, those elbows naturally hug in toward the midline at neutral instead of having to force this kind of action that really is cranking and doing some wonky business in your shoulder joint. So with our wider turned out base, this actually makes much more energetic sense in those rotational actions. You're not going to be resisting your joints quite as much. So when you meet the earth and get that external rotation, I know it's confusing because external rotation, the elbow wraps in, but the bicep rolls out. That's how we define that. Bicep rolls out, the point of the elbow points straight back toward your thighs. And we're not trying to wrap the elbows all the way into the midline, just to neutral, right? We push through the index and middle finger knuckles. There's our rotational counteraction. We push with those knuckles while pulling with the heart, and that allows us this really long, stable stance that then can turn into our downward facing dog. It can be our cow and our cat, articulating those joints really actively through the entire palm, elbow, shoulder, and deep into the core, so that we're fully contained and graceful in our connection with the earth, because the earth is actually holding us up, right? We no longer have to think of gravity as this thing that's pulling us down. Instead, it's this thing that is rebounding us up. So the arches of the palms, just like the arches of our feet, help us make that connection into the deeper core, that space between Jalandhara Bandha and Uddiyana Bandha, that heart chakra. Something else to consider is that from the Chinese medicine perspective, the hand and the forearm and the arm have the meridians of some really powerful systems. The heart, the lung, the large and small intestines, the pericardium around your heart, and the triple burner, which is this fantastic Chinese organ that is hard for us Westerners sometimes to wrap our head around. But these are powerful systems of basic energizing and action in the world. So the more we learn to really energize Hasta Bandha, really engage with the earth, it will hold us up more and make us work less. I hope that you've enjoyed this lesson, and if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. I am Richelle. I am the yoga engineer. You can email me at richelle@yogaengineer.com. Again, we can set up a private session if that will suit you better, or we can email and I can answer your questions. I look forward to seeing you in class soon when all this has come back to normal. I appreciate you. Use your yoga. I'll see you soon.